Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Big Bad Bench. I am John, and today I'm going to be building myself a new streaming PC. Let's get started, and I'll talk about things as we go along. So what we have here is the foundation of a Ryzen system. My current streaming PC is on its last legs, so I have a old HP Z800 that's been a great computer, but it's got some issues. Alright, so here we have our Ryzen 9 3900X. Nice little CPU. This was actually in my gaming PC, but it's not an ideal fit. And I'll talk about that more as we go along. So it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little tiny triangle there on this corner of the processor, and on the motherboard we have the same kind of little triangle, and there's also like a white dot there, and so those need to get lined up. And of course, I just banged the CPU on the retention leg thing. Okay, so you drop it down in there. It shouldn't require any force. And just give it a little wiggle to make sure everything's sitting down real nice. Close our retention clip. I'm going to give the CPU a little wipe down real quick. And I'm going to be using a stock Ryzen, I forget the name on this for this thing, but it's basically a stock Ryzen heatsink. So here's the most controversial thing that I'll probably ever do on my channel directly, and that's going to be putting on some thermal paste. And so you can see, so this thermal paste is GD900. It's relatively cheap to get, and you can get a lot of it at once off of eBay or Amazon or whatever. Basically shipped directly from China. And so that's about how much I put on there. So I'm going to give the heatsink a wipe down. I did clean this with isopropanol, both of these, before getting started today, but you can see there's always a little bit of residue on there that you can clean off. Okay, so we're going to stick this down, line up our little tabs. Okay. Gonna clump this tab down on this side, maybe. Come on, you heatsink. Okay, that one's down. Alright, that one's down. Okay, so you can see the little retention clip is around both lugs on the socket there. And then just give this a little flip over, and that'll hold it down. And I like to give it a little wiggle just to make sure it's totally down. Alright, so there's that one down. There we go. CPU installed. Next I'm going to stick in the RAM. This is two 16 gig sticks of DDR 2400, which, you know, is not the fastest stuff around, but I got this for like 60 bucks. So 60 bucks for 32 gigs of RAM is a pretty solid deal. And with Ryzen CPUs and more modern Intel ones, you want to put them in pairs, staggered, spaced one slot apart, and you want to go the furthest ones out first. As you populate it, you can put more ones in. So this makes sure that we get dual channel RAM on this thing. So that's our CPU and our RAM. Gonna stick our SSD in next. This is not gonna be the final SSD that goes into this PC, but this came out of my gaming rig, and it should work because it was from a Ryzen system, so it should be okay. It's not the same motherboard, so we're gonna get Windows activation errors and stuff like that, but it should work for some basic testing until I get the real drive installed. Okay, so that's everything we need on our motherboard. Gotta set this aside for a second. Lay down a little towel. I have a very, very fancy, expensive case that we're gonna be using here. So this whole system is stuff that I got used basically, except for this power supply. That was new, but it was not directly from retail. So let's set that down. Alright, so here's our case. It's an older NZXT case. I think you can still buy these, but I like these cases. They're not particularly flashy or anything. They have a basic flat front. But what this should do is let me have kind of a quiet computer ultimately. Part of the issue with my current streaming PC is that it's loud. I don't know if you can hear like that humming that comes across on my audio. And hopefully this PC should let me stream a little bit more quietly. Alright, so first up, before we put other things in, is the I/O shield. Always make sure your I/O shield is sticking in properly, oriented properly. I'm gonna do is do a little test fit here. So you can see the studs for screwing down the motherboard are in different locations along here. So what I'm gonna do is just double check to make sure that all of those locations are correct for this motherboard. So 3 and then 3 here. Okay, yeah, so we're all good. The next most important thing is, see these two little flappies here? These can go down into the ports. So in this case it would be our Ethernet port and our top USB port here. So if you're not careful, you can cram those little flaps down in there, and that can cause some issues. So always be careful about putting your motherboard in with those little flaps. I'm just gonna sit this in here. And one of the nice things about these NZXT cases, and I guess a lot of more modern cases, one of the motherboard standoffs, I called it a stud earlier, it's a standoff, this is the real word. This middle standoff has a little stud on it. And what that does is helps you locate the motherboard. You can see it's not going to move around much. Alright, and so now we got to put our screws in around the edge. This particular set of standoffs requires 632 screws. Normally when you're building PCs, there's 2 different thread screws that you have to deal with. These are the coarser ones, so this is coarse one. Let me grab a fine one to show you the difference. Here's some of the fine ones. So you can see the difference in the thread. This one is a 632 screw. This is a 3mm. Some standoffs require 3mm. Some standoffs require 632. So you just got to double check. If you go to put in your 632 and it's very difficult to thread, that means your standoff is probably a 3mm. Don't force it. Okay, so you see that one went in. And when I do these, I like to not tighten them up all the way until I have all of my screws in there. So they're all going to go in. They're all going to be a little loose. Should also note that things like SSDs and laptop hard drives use 3mm screws for their screws, but bigger hard drives like the 3.5-inch hard drives use the 632s. These, I forget what the thread is on there. It's like a 2mm thread maybe for most of them, but I have seen a couple of different threads types for the SSD standoff. So hopefully your motherboard has come with the proper standoffs. If not, try carefully to try some other standoffs until you other screws until you find a thread that fits in there nicely. Again, with all these things, you don't want to force the screw threads to go down. It should happen really gently. Oh, let's see, this one is not behaving nicely. Oh, let's see. Slightly misaligned here. Look like a couple of the standoffs might have been a little bent. I don't know where this case, who originally had this case. There's a guy I buy cases from time to time. He seems to disassemble the computers and sell the parts on eBay, but cases tend to be sort of difficult to sell on eBay, so he sells them locally. So we tend to get pretty good deals on these cases. I might have overpaid for this one, but I bought this one and another one at the same time, and I got a much better deal on that other one. Alright, so just double check, make sure all of our screws are tight, and you don't want to over tighten on these. Just get them down, get them snug, don't force it. Okay, so we got our motherboard in our case. Let's put in the power supply. Change up our view here a little bit. Sorry for the seasickness. I'm gonna put this fan side down. That's up for debate how you like to do yours, but for how this thing's oriented, as long as you're not putting your computer on carpet, I generally like to have the fan side down. Power supplies, like I was mentioning about the threads. Power supplies are all going to have 632 threads. Looking for some screws over here. I am kind of, I don't know, compulsory, obsessive compulsive when it comes to my screws. I like to try to have them all match when I go to assemble a system. So now what I'm going to do is thread the power connectors through to where they're supposed to be. I'm not going to actually connect them yet. Oh, no, I am going to connect them. Okay, so let's do that one there. And this one here. Okay, and this one is 8-pin for CPU power. Gonna thread that up there. And then I'm also going to take this little bundle of crap. I don't know how this front panel connector is wired up. It seems to be the proper way. Let's see here. So if we look at this, got a white stripe here, and that white stripe goes to power LED plus, which is in this position. So yeah, this seems correctly oriented for a standard motherboard power switch, and then the hard drive LED is the last two things, and that's going to be on the bottom. Yeah, so this thing is wired up for a standard front panel connector. Hey Adam, how's it going? So this, we don't need that extra little connector that was added there. We're just going to do this straight up into the case. And I will let's put the audio in there too. Gonna move you back up to the top. Alright, you can see this motherboard has two sets of power connectors here for the CPU power. Typically you don't need both if the motherboard includes them. Sometimes you got to check with your individual motherboard manual, but sometimes they'll include two sets to provide extra power for the CPU. Sometimes they just have you know, in case your power supply only has a 4-pin. I would not recommend, this is a Ryzen 9 3900, which is a 12-core. I would not recommend using a 12-core with only a 4-pin power connector. There tends to be a little bit more power draw potentially. So that's our CPU power. The other thing is I've seen people assemble computers or have gotten computers in to repair where there's been weird like restarting issues, or sometimes the computer won't turn on. And one of the symptoms I've seen is that these CPU power connectors are not plugged in all the way. One of the problems that can cause is basically like a high current draw across that connector, and you'll see like that connector starting to turn black from like the shorting happening. So be careful, make sure that all of your power connectors going to your motherboard are plugged in all the way. Okay, so So here's our front panel connector. So this has our power switch and our power LED and our hard drive LED on it. These have basically been standardized. I think Asus motherboards still resist following the standard, but basically, you know, these, if we look here, so there's a set of 9 pins overall with 1 key. The first pin is going to be the positive for your power LED. The second one's going to be ground. The next 2 pins are going to be for your power switch. Then down here is the first one is going to be the positive for your hard drive. The next one's going to be ground. Then the next 2 are going to be for your reset switch. Some Asus motherboards, I think, have decided that they don't like to do that, but pretty much everyone else has gotten on the train and can use a standard connector. Front panel audio connector. Also, you can see there's a key here, so that only fits in one way. I guess if you push hard enough, you probably could cram it on the wrong way, but don't do that. Okay, so then our next thing is our USB 3 connector, and I'm gonna run that one up under here. So with USB 3 connectors, these pins are very thin. There is often a key position here. You can see it in this one. There's a missing pin right there. So you got to be real careful with these. I've seen a lot of USB 3 headers totally destroyed from people trying to force them in. And so you just want to get it lined up and just give it a little bit of little pressure there. It shouldn't take too much force. If you're planning on moving your PC around, I do recommend putting a dab of hot glue or something on each side of this, because it just does help keep that header from falling out. Okay, so that's all that stuff. So what I'm gonna do first is, before I start with the water cooling stuff, I'm gonna put in a regular video card. So I'm gonna stick in a regular Radeon 6700 XT here. This also came out of my gaming PC. So we're just gonna put that in to test to make sure that the system boots up. I know that the RAM and the CPU and this video card are good. I have not tested this motherboard before starting today, so hopefully this motherboard is good to go. Alright, video card is in, and that should be all we need to get started. I guess I should throw on a mouse, keyboard, in case this thing sends me to the BIOS, however you like to say it. I'm not going to judge. Okay. Power connector, and there's my capture. That thing, there's that side of that. Oh, we don't want that in there. Uh-oh. Okay, here we go. I'm back. Alright. Display port. Stick it in that bottom one. Alright, let's see what happens here. Alright, we got fan spin. So what that indicates is that we don't have any shorts anywhere. So that's good. Let's see if we're... That's not correct. That should not be capturing that. I'm gonna pop out my capture device for a second. Well, that's annoying. Let's try a different display port. Nope. More different display port? Nope. Alright, what happens if we try to go over to this? Oh yeah, I'm batting 1,000 on this capture. Alright, let's see here. Oh, I think I saw a blip. Oh man, isn't technology great? Let's see. This is why you shouldn't just randomly try crap before you start your stream. Oh man, I got all kinds of things yelling at me right now. PC technology is annoying. That is correct, Adam. That's funny. It just like decided that it's gonna just capture my screen that I was testing with earlier, which has no longer been connected. Let me try a different wire here. Maybe it doesn't like DisplayPort. Well, that's freaking annoying. Alright, well, I guess. So I hear this thing making noise. And also I see the hard drive blinking, so I have a feeling that it's booted up. I've also lost my other thing. Oh, here we go. All right, there's my face again, because, you know, y'all need to see that. So I have a feeling this thing is booted up. Yeah, and so I just hit the power button. It's blinking, and then it shut down, which tells me that it had booted into Windows, and it was good to go. So that's a good sign. So now what I'm going to try to do is get this water cooling stuff going. Let's pull out this video card. Alright, so I am pressing that little retention clip in there, and then lifting out gently. Alright, so the reason I decided to do this build was because I just picked up this RX6700XT for $200, which is a really good price for this card. So the last one that I had in here, I paid, I think, $700 for at the height of the pandemic and the video card crisis and whatnot. So this was a heck of a price for this card. You know, video card prices have started coming down, but they're still kind of expensive. You know, a lot of the time you can find the 6700 XT for the MSRP, but $200 is kind of a crazy price. But the reason this this card was so cheap is because it has this water cooling block. And you know, basically the seller could not sell the card because nobody wanted a video card for you know, that had a water cooling block, because it's a pain in the butt to do water cooling, sort of. I mean, it's not awful, but you know, it's just more complicated than plugging in a system, plugging in a card and booting up your system. So I decided, okay, let's try to get this thing going. And theoretically, if this all works right, this will wind up being, you know, a little quieter than my other computer, hopefully. This is a RGB header. I'm not going to worry about RGB right now. Just going to cram that in there. I'm going to set this down for a side. Oh, one other thing I want to point out real quick is that there are modern shoot, I forget what the name of these things are. You know, fittings. Water cooling fittings that are a lot nicer than these things I picked up at Home Depot. These will have an O-ring in here that fits up real nicely against these things, and you know, these elbows. It makes it super easy to connect up your tubing. I don't have a ton of water cooling fittings right now. I didn't have enough to set this up, so I used good old-fashioned Home Depot and some plumber's tape, and we'll get started with that. And so what I want to do is test this thing out, and if it ultimately works, then I'm going to be near a micro center this weekend, so I can pick up some water cooling fittings. Yeah, that video card is bigger than a Mac Mini, basically. One thing I wanted to show, since I have some Mac people here today, this is a water pump from a G5 water-cooled system, and this is a SwiftTech water pump. And you can see that, you know, this was made by Delphi. Basically, these SwiftTech ones are just rebranded other manufacturers. I don't know if Delphi actually makes these things and sells them to other companies, or if there's like a Chinese manufacturer that's actually making these and sending them to everybody. Oh, actually, you can see here. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I took off the SwiftTech sticker, and it says Delphi underneath. So I thought that was kind of funny that this is basically a Mac, the same as the pumps that they used in the G5s. That's a topic for another day. So this water cooling stuff, so I have a radiator and a pump. This was all stuff that I had gotten in a lot of junk at one point. And both of the pump and the radiator were totally full of rust and nastiness. So I've cleaned them up, lubed up the O-ring a little bit, totally taken apart this, taken out the rust. So I actually don't know if this pump is going to work nicely or not, but it should be alright. Pumps tend to be, as long as they're clean, and like, you know, this little, there's a ceramic ball here, and that has to fit down on inside of here. There's just all kinds of rust and nastiness crammed in there. So I can't imagine that this pump was working well when they stopped using it. But they are rebuildable, which is nice. So this all was cleaned out. It looks all nice and clean now. Some 4 screws hold this thing together. These screws are apparently stainless. And just like when we rebuild old Macintoshes, since we have a coarse thread going into some plastic, you want to give it a backwards spin first before you start screwing it in all the way. You'll feel it pop in, or like make a little click, and then you can screw it in. And so hopefully that O-ring is in good enough shape to seal. Okay, so we got our pump. Get rid of our little SwiftTech sticker. Alright, so one of the nice things about this case is it has this removable fan mount. And so what we can do is line up our pump or our reservoir. One of the issues, so this has to, if this is the top of our case up here and this is the bottom, it sits like this. The radiator is going to have to be behind this. If we take a look here, we can't mount, we look at our holes, right? See those holes there? We can't mount this thing with the fittings at the bottom. You can see there's a gap there, and that bottom section gets in the way. But if we flip it over like this, we can make our holes line up correctly. And so you can do this a couple different ways. Normally what I would do is I would prefer to have the fans behind the pump inside the case to create a little bit more space up here, but it looks like there's not going to be enough space to do that. So I'm going to have our fans in the front, which is going to restrict airflow a little bit. So but even these fans are fans that I had recycled from other projects. I dig the look of this like gray turbine blade thing. Okay. Alright, so then got these chunky screws. So you have to go through the fan and then screw down into the radiator. This particular radiator, I keep going back and forth, is totally copper, and so that means the metal's going to be kind of soft. And so when we go to screw in these fans, just want to keep that in mind and be really cautious and not over tighten them. The other thing that's a little bit annoying and kind of drives my screw OCD nuts is that I don't have 8 of the same screw, so I'm gonna have to go and find a set of 8 that are all the same. But just to get this thing up and running and testing, this will be okay. But it will probably keep me up at night. So again, I'm just like grabbing the end of my screwdriver here and just tightening up very loosely. I'm not going hog on this because it's soft metal and you don't want to strip that out. Also, for the final build, and this might not wind up being the radiator I use for real, but for the final build, I'll probably put a little bit of double-sided tape in between the fan and the fan mount, and it just adds a little bit of sound absorption and gets rid of a little bit of vibration noise from the computer. Okay, so our fans are mounted to this bracket. Got our pump rebuilt. Let's grab our case again. Oops. It's way harder to get a whole PC in my camera frame than it is to get an old Mac motherboard in here. Okay. I think these were, at least this bottom one was stripped out by the previous owner. It's cross-threaded or something. It's not sitting nicely. So the radiator just barely clears. It's going to be enough to get some tubing in there. But that's good to go. Gonna run this fan wire down under here. Run it down to this header. So basically this is just to get it spinning. Ultimately, I think what I would like to do is make an adapter. So you can see the fan headers for the original heatsink fan for the GPU. So whatever system this was in, I don't know how they wired it up, but I would want to wire these fans to be controlled by the GPU itself. And you know, the pinouts are basically the same as a standard fan pinout. It's just that it's a different physical connector. And so you can make little adapters up so that it can control the fan speed. Okay, so we got all that stuff out of here. This RGB header keeps getting in our way. Let's plug this in real quick. Oh, actually, no. I'm going to leave that unplugged for the time being. I'm going to unplug the motherboard power connector, and I'm going to unplug the CPU power connector, because once I get this filled, I want to connect up the pump, turn on the power supply to cycle some water in here so that we can fill it up. Alright, so let's see here. And again, ultimately I'd like this to be a little bit prettier, but what we're going to do is just get this hooked up to test it and make sure everything works right. Alright. If you get seasick, look away for a sec. Gonna switch our view up. Alright, so we have our pump. So there's a arrow on the pump that says which way it should come out. So we're going to come out of the pump. We can thread these down underneath. The nice thing about this case is it's got all these perforations on the bottom, so you could just make a little put a couple screws in through these mounts on the pump. So for the video card, this is going to be our in, and then that's going to be the out. So we're going to come out of here, go into there, come out of here, come up to here, come back, and come down over there. Hopefully, I have enough tubing. We shall find out. So, I'm going to be a little stingy here with the tubing, I think. So again, like I said, I wouldn't do this if this was going to be your daily driver computer that, you know, is going to be on 24/7. I wouldn't have Home Depot fittings and regular old Tygon with this kind of thing. But for something that I'm going to just use for testing for a couple days until I get a chance to go get some real water cooling supplies, this will be okay. Lubricate this just a little bit. Let me see. And now I'm gonna make a mess here. Oh yeah, I was gonna make a mess. Oh, and it wasn't even on camera. Jeez, I gotta be a better YouTuber. All the exciting stuff I do is off camera. Okay, so I just put a little bit of water on there to lubricate it, make it a little bit easier to cram this tubing on here. And it really doesn't matter which side of the pump or of the radiator that you run your tubing, as long as it's run. Fill it with cheese dip. Yeah, well, there were some good videos of people using things like cheese dip for thermal paste for on the CPUs. I think one year Linus Tech Tips filled one with concrete as a April Fool's joke. Okay, so you can see that's pushed in all the way, and so I mentioned somewhere, but this is the first time that I've really done water cooling in about 15 years, and I've never done it with nice hardware before, so this hopefully will not be a total explosion. Okay. Alright, that tube's there. That up a little bit. Okay. That one's good. Now our last connection. Come up, and cut it about there. Of course, I haven't leak tested this radiator or anything, so hopefully it just doesn't start shooting stuff out everywhere. Okay. Ah, crap. I knew there was something I was forgetting. I wanted to do a fill port. Okay. Alright, yeah, we're good. We can do that still. I was like, yeah, that's too easy. And yes, this is ugly as sin, but this is just testing. Oh, I forgot to lubricate. that thing. So we got a little kink in there now. Alright. So in the future, if I were to do that again, I'd make that a little bit shorter because of this added length. We don't really want kinks in here. It should, once the water starts pumping, it should be alright, but you don't want restrictions in your water flow. Okay, so this. Okay. So I was gonna stick this little fitting on there, but the thread on this is actually a lot, or the nipple or whatever this is called is a bigger diameter than the other stuff, so that's not gonna work. So we're just gonna go like this. And put on one of these. Lay this down for a second. The other thing is it helps if you have like an area for air to escape when you're trying to fill these things. So this is probably going to be kind of a pain in the butt because this system does not have that. Oh yeah. And I'm already spilling liquid everywhere. Already got water down on our motherboard. This is what I was talking about, that you should have a bleed port. Alright, we're hitting the fun part of this show. Oh jeez. Oh jeez. Oh jeez. We haven't even really gotten started yet. And I already have dumped water all over the motherboard. Trust me, folks, I'm a professional. So what I'm doing here is, oh god. So I'm just like pinching the tubing to encourage some air movement basically. And we're getting little bubbles coming up out of there. It's gonna take a little while. Once I get some liquid down in there, I'll turn on the pump. But I don't want the pump to exist without too much liquid. Yeah, the cheese probably would have been safer for motherboards. That's why I like having you around, Adam. You have good ideas. Oh, sorry. So I'm just going up and down, pinching the tubes. Shaking the tubes. It also helps if you shift things around a little bit. So I'm gonna turn that, rotate this a little bit. Alright, a little bit more deionized water. This is probably good enough to start the pump, but I'm going to be a little bit more patient. While I'm doing this, let me show you. So this is, oh, that looks like crap. This is how much I've spent on this system. So the power supply was $25. The video card was $200. The motherboard was $50. 32 gigs of RAM for $60. The case was $30. And this processor, which is the most expensive component in this system, I bought that during the high point of nasty prices during the pandemic, and so I paid $330 for that used. So that's not an ideal, that's hurting the overall value proposition for this computer. But overall, for just under $700, it's a pretty solid system. It'll be good at a lot of different things. So this 3900, again, it's a 12 core, 24 thread processor. I had it in my gaming PC, but my gaming PC is an old converted Mac G4 Sawtooth computer case. So there's not a ton of airflow in those, and that's created it basically the processor can work for about 30 seconds before it overheats. So it's too much processor. I'm hoping to find a Ryzen like 5700 to go in there. I like having more than the standard like 6 cores. I guess nowadays 6 cores is kind of standard, and I like having more than that. But it it it's just too much heat output for a little tiny case that I had to modify to fit an old to fit new stuff inside of an old case. My current streaming PC that I'm using right now is a HP Z800, which is a dual processor. I think the Intel processors were called Westmere. They're 6 core 12 thread processors, so overall it's 12 cores, 24 threads. But it's relatively old technology, and it's hot. They throw off a lot of heat, so it's not an ideal situation. But the big issue is that for my streaming stuff, I need USB 3 ports. And so I have a couple of USB 3 cards inside of the computer, because back at that age of computer, well, I guess even on Macs, but on PCs, USB 3 wasn't really a thing yet. And so I have those USB 3 cards, and they're starting to get buggy. I have a lot of dropouts of my connections, and so I don't want to deal with that. There were admittedly some issues like that for AMD PCs, for USB 3 dropouts and stuff like that, but it's supposedly with BIOS updates and stuff that's been resolved. Alright, so we should be sort of good to go here. I think there's enough water in the loop to try to start the pump up. So we can see here, so this is the inlet side of the pump, and that's full of, or sort of full of water down there. So let's see what happens. So what I'm gonna do, back here, pump uses standard Molex connection, so we're going to connect that up. Yeah, I haven't even used a hub, and I'm having dropout issues, so I can imagine hubs also having another layer of complexity and bugginess to throw into the loop. Okay, so here's our main power connector for the motherboard. There still is a little bit of water down on the motherboard, but we're not going to power up the motherboard yet. So we have this connector. Oh shoot, I gotta find the thing. Hold on 1 second. Alright, you hang out there for a minute. So this little jobby is just a jumper that goes from the green pin back when these used to have colors, the power good signal, and loops it back to ground to rig the power supply to switch on. So we're gonna plug that in. Look, I even got water on the power connector. Jeez. I knew this was gonna be a shit show. Alright, so that's off. But because we have this loop back on there, we're gonna, as soon as this turns on, we should pump. I'm gonna hold my funnel with the open connector up really high. Okay, well, I heard the pump going, so that was good. It took a second, but I heard it. So older pumps like this are not going to like air in the system. Yeah, that's what would happen there. So you can see we got a bunch of bubbles here. All right, gonna need more water. How has the Mac Studio been running for you, Adam? They look like cool systems. Oh, shit. I've been waiting to buy a new Mac until M2 became more prevalent, and until M2 was announced. I was excited to see the announcement this week of M2 going into the new MacBook Airs and MacBooks. Basically, I'm still just trying to get some liquid in here. You can see we're starting to fill up this side. Tilt it. Look out. Making progress. Slowly making progress here. Pump just hit a dry spot. All right, Adam, thanks for stopping by. It's good to see you. Okay, got more liquid in there. Let's flip this back up. Pump down to the bottom. We're slowly filling up our loop here. We're getting there. Probably should have filled up the radiator first. Oh man, this is a pain in the butt. Holding this over my mouth. I am a professional, folks. I am a professional. I'm actually not a professional. If this is your first time ever seeing one of my streams, I am in no way a professional. I have been working on computers for 25 years or so, but I'm definitely not like a pro modder or anything like that. If you want to see elegant water cooling videos, make sure to check out Jay's 2 Cents. He's been doing water cooling really well for a while. And he also has an editor, so his videos are a lot more easy to digest. But if you want to see real world shit, here we go. This is about as real gets. Add some more water. see people like Linus and Jay, this is all the stuff that they cut out of their videos. It's basic. Oh shit. Just keep rocking it. Encourage the air to go different places. Be patient. Eventually it'll get there. And like I was saying earlier, it definitely helps to engineer a bleed port into your water cooling system. You'll notice most modern radiators will have fittings on both ends, or holes for fittings on both ends, and generally you want to have your main water lines to be towards the bottom of a radiator, and then you can use that top one to be the bleed location. Good thing so far is that there's not much leakage happening at any other location around here. It's all for me making a mess. Really, I should have put this fill port on this side, so the suction side for the pump. Again, like I was saying, I'm not a professional, so but yeah, that would have made things go much smoother, I think. Okay, I'm gonna use my mouth. And so there's still a lot of water in here. Don't want to turn that pump on while there's a lot of water that close up to the top. Sometimes you can blow it back out, and I don't want to blow all that water out over the computer. See what I just did there? Don't do that. Oh. Ooh. Oof. This is annoying. I'm gonna have to go back and rechange the name of this video later to Noobs Screws Around with Tubing for an Hour. And making a mess. So this is an interesting question. Would it have been easier to just find a used broken 6700 that I could steal its regular cooler off of? Which is, I might say yes to that one. So one thing you can see here is that this damn this pump definitely is not healthy. Again. There we go. Okay, we're getting a full flow through the system now. So that's good. Still a lot of bubbles. So this is where reservoirs can help. I was thinking about incorporating this reservoir, which I probably should have, but I might do that eventually. So if I turn this, yeah, you can see getting good flow through the system now, but there are lots of bubbles still. Alright, so now that this thing's flowing alright, hold on, I'm gonna move the camera again. I'm gonna look for leaks around all the fittings. Obviously there's a lot of water in here because I've spilled so much water in here. But I want to look for any liquid that's showing up around any of the fittings. That pump is not healthy. That's a shame. I might be able to use the one out of the Mac G5. I'm gonna dump a little of this water out here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna connect up this reservoir. I know this isn't how it's really supposed to be connected, but I just want to have basically an area for any excess liquid to collect and hopefully a little bit of air to start bleeding itself out of the system. And I can basically just hold that up out of the computer somewhere. The important bit now, though, is that you don't want this region to be lower than anything else, or else the water can start draining out of the loop. All right. So if we look in here, you can see that I've done some spillage. Gonna connect up the video card just to get this wire out of my way. Cotton swab to get most of the water up. There's quite a bit over here. Alright, well, I think what I'm going to do is, I think I'm gonna blow this thing out and then let it dry out at least overnight, because there's a little bit more liquid in here than I'm comfortable with. And I really don't want to turn this thing on in its current state. Um, but let's sort of review where we're at. So we know we have a functional motherboard and processor and RAM because that booted up. SSD's alright. I still don't know if this video card's any good, but I don't want to power this thing up right now with all that liquid on the motherboard. So hopefully, if everything else goes well, if that thing dries out, we'll get this thing booted up. I'll do a little update, Facebook, YouTube short thing to say if this thing worked or not, and hopefully I'll have some benchmark numbers to show you. I always think it's interesting, to do something like a 3D mark, when you have a system and sort of say, okay, if we spent $700 on this thing, how does it compare across all the other systems that have been benchmarked in 3D Mark? And so, I don't think 3D Mark's a great tool to tell you, exact performance of your system, but to get a relative idea of how your system stacks up to other things. I think it's a nice, easy, quick comparison tool. But yeah, so this wasn't a complete success today. I would say, I guess my last two videos have sort of been fails. But I have a little cooling loop set up here, and I think ultimately I'm going to be successful, and hopefully I'll have a nice new streaming PC that won't bug out on me. So yeah, thanks for stopping by. Thank you, Adam, for chatting with me today. Yeah, get subscribed. Thanks for everyone that's already been subscribed. And feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions about anything that I went over today. I know basically today was a lot of just sort of playing with tubes, which isn't particularly exciting. But hopefully I'll have some other